You did an illustrated book about Daniel Johnston. How did that correlate with coming with the film Devil and Daniel Johnston?
That was there is a connection in that. See, that was a text by Spanish artist Ricardo Cavolo, who's a wonderful artist. I love his stuff. And I think that the original graphic novel, in the film, there was a lot of similarities, meaning that he was drawing the pictures on the same kind of narrative outline that the film drew from Johnston's life. It was going to be published by my publisher, one of my publishers, $2 Radio, and they just simply asked me if I would like to write an original text, and I agreed to it, in that it allowed me to kind of, I mean, the text is in some ways about Johnston, but in some ways it was about my ideas of biography and, you know, the bedroom that you make stuff in, and just the, you know, the miracle of, you know, human beings trying to communicate something to another human being. So it allowed me to kind of deface Cavolo's text originally. There was also that element as well. And then it allowed me to kind of translate my concept and some of my ideas with biography that I was playing around with at the time. And that, I don't know, a great biographer like a Robert Caro writing about Lyndon Johnson, you know, that's not Lyndon Johnson, that's Robert Caro, exhibiting something about himself, even through documented sources. And so, yeah, that's kind of what that graphic novel was about. I got a kick out of that.
One of the first books I read about West Virginia was Everything in Its Path, about the coal mine the slag mine that broke.
Yeah.
Most people hadn't read that book, and it was one of the first books that kind of went into what was going on in West Virginia, the culture that, why such a horrific tragedy we see or know about that's way more common, but it was one of the first it wasn't a natural disaster, a man-made disaster.
Yeah.
Whereas slag mine, would you want?
No, I mean, it's just it's a complicated history, you know. When I think, you know, I've had family members. So I think our most recent disaster was Upper Big Branch, which I think was about 2005, 2006. About 30, I want to say 30 guys lost their lives because of the buildup of dust, and there was an explosion that was created. But yeah, I mean, we have one right after another throughout the 20th century, which is a negative history. What's strange too about the area is that there's also the flip side of that too, where there's an interview with Richard Burton that Dick Cavett did in the early 1980s that you can find on YouTube, and he's talking about his own father, who was a coal miner. And what's also strange about that seam is of bituminous coal is there here in West Virginia, and then it goes down under the earth and under the ocean, and it pops back up again over in the British Isles. That same basic seam is the coal that's being mined. And he talked about his father being, and I found that true too. Like, you know, the coal miner is this sort of figure who was like prince of the underworld, and who like had a special power because they were able to, you know, touch this material that this ancient material that basically won world wars in the 20th century, and without it they wouldn't have been won. So yeah, I mean, it's such a complicated, kind of complex thing. It's been part of our history. The thing now is coal mining, I think, is about less than 1% of even West Virginia's state economy. I think it's about the same for Kentucky. You know, over the course of the last 30 years, they basically, you know, just been knocking down mountains and getting it off of, you know, the surface, rather than having to do the, you know, the old school deep mining that was, you know, done predominantly throughout, you know, most of the 20th century.
Do you live near any strip mine? I mean, it looks, I mean, from
yeah, I mean, they're doing that all the time. Yeah, and I mean, timber's also big. You know, my town where I'm from, Rainelle, it flooded in 2016. 23 people lost their lives in the flood, and that was because that wasn't strip mills, but they are strip mines, but they, just strip timber. They go through and what they call clear cut the timber, and they just take it down to, the skin of the mountain. And because of that, it gets thrown into the streams. And then when it rains, the streams are all full and there's no place for the water to go except into the community. So yeah, the ecological, effects of, some of these things I guess we're still seeing the effects of, for sure.
Or is that something that you find yourself increasingly interested in writing about? Or, I mean, it's very organic the way you
Yeah, I have it. There's a book that I wrote that I need to kind of finish up. It has like some tweaks that need to be done to it, but I wrote it for about 3 or 4 years here since the Sarah book, and it ends with that. It ends with that flood, because I actually drove everybody into that flood. It was my birthday, and we were going home for the weekend, and my mom had made me a birthday cake, and I had my kids and my wife, and I kept saying it'll be fine, and it wasn't fun at all. So that's the way that book ends. And then also that event kind of felt like almost metaphorical to me too, just the passage of time and the way that things get lost. There was a woman who lost her, because what happened to people in the little town, like, I mean, just a few hundred yards away from where my parents lived, people were losing their lives. Is that night, once the water got high enough, all the power, of course, it went out. And you don't realize, but when your house floods, all your furniture starts to float as well. So furniture would float, and then it would go towards the door or wherever there was a crack where, water could, of course, escape. And so people were trapped inside their houses virtually, by their furniture. There's this little old lady that lived down from my mom and dad and her husband that night. I guess they originally got up on the kitchen table, and then I think they had to get up on the kitchen counters, because I guess they were a little bit higher than the kitchen table. And most people didn't leave because of their pets or because of age. For instance, she had a husband who was experiencing Alzheimer's, and she didn't want to move him because that's when he would become, disoriented and would kind of lash out. So she was just going to see if they could just wait it out. And that night he had a heart attack. They think happened to him. And what was so strange too is that, she kept his body beside her in the water up to her waist, throughout the course of the night. And that's the way that they were, found the next day once, the state police started coming in. So yeah, I mean, it was just like this massive, tragic sort of event that, we basically lived through. It was sort of like, after Hurricane Katrina, they came through and marked up the windows and searched the houses, and there would be 0, or in some of the houses, there would be an X with a 1 that would be located there. So yeah, we're definitely dealing with the fallout of some of this stuff, for sure.
Has it led to more activism?
West Virginia is kind of changing, or at least it feels like it's changing to me. We've had such a double whammy in the last couple of decades, with the opioid crisis, and I'm still dealing with that. There was a poor lady was found behind our house here who had overdosed just back in February. Somebody, I think, robbed the stash house here in East Beckley, and they had a big shootout out on the street, and some guy was killed. That's been a couple months ago. So we're kind of it kind of feels like sort of the end of that. Maybe, I don't know. Maybe it's wishful thinking as I say those events out loud. But it feels like maybe some younger people are moving into the area. I think probably the reality of the next 20 years in this state is that people from outside the state are going to move in, drive up property values, drive up rent, and before you know it, you're going to have West Virginians who aren't necessarily West Virginians, which we'll see. But at least there feels like there's some younger people who are doing some things that trying to put the place back together, because it's the state has just went through it. especially with the opioid crisis. Because I used to teach in a federal prison, or I teach one of my classes. We used to do a college program there. And I can remember it was like 2004, 2005 when you started seeing guys who had been, they worked in a sawmill one year, they hurt their back, and then the next year they were in a federal correctional institute, which made absolutely no sense. And then, the states grappled with it. And it's to the point where I don't think this is a statistic that's true anymore, but 4 or 5 years ago in Tucker County in the state of West Virginia, I think 70% of school-age children were being raised by a grandparent, which I think is just like a shocking statistic to try to wrap your mind around, because overdose deaths, et cetera. So yeah.
I just wrote a piece where that informed being in foster care, where a girl says to me, how many of us were raised by our abuelos,
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's coming out, it's like this was like kids born in the 60s and 70s, and there had been deinstitutionalization from Reagan, and
directly tied to that, the health of the state of West Virginia 1980, you can see the drastic change that occurred. Like, it's not anecdotal evidence. The state got transformed, right, in a very negative sort of fashion.
Yeah, I actually have a friend who just came back from doing research on opioid and heroin addiction, and found that how in the absence of course the availability of opioids, they will go to heroin, and how there's this fatalism, and even the fatalism of getting AIDS, getting sick, and it's an interesting paper that she wrote. But we have the same thing. We have the same exact issue out here.
Yeah, and our fatalism too. Like, I think it's kind of ingrained within our state, which made the abuse so much worse, I believe.
Yeah.
But I mean, I've had EMTs who are ambulance drivers who were responding to homes multiple times in the same day. Where mom would overdose at 6 a.m, and then grandma at 1 p.m, and then the granddaughter at 4 p.m. It's just stuff that you can't even imagine.
Let me go over and just see Gian.
Yeah, there you go.
Any writer worth a fuck should be in the business of killing lies, regardless of what fiction must be made up. The art of writing is about killing lies. It is a kind of war, and being that, it may consume you or it may make you sick. So we had consideration for writers. I guess this is you talking about him. He made an effort to always come off serious about the work. He deferred to writers. He felt less crazy for that.
Yeah, I think it's true.
I mean, I think you said that.
Yeah, I may have. Yeah, I've said a lot of things over the years. It sounds like me towards the end.
They're like, wait, a writer must have an editor for the. You'd be at a loss to have to come up with that confidence on your own. A writer must have an editor for this. The editor is the optimist.
Yeah, I think so, and I think that's what was so magical about like Gian, is just like, man, he could say, because he was an excellent line editor. I mean, but
wait, sorry, Nico Walker and Brad Phillips, I think, wrote that. So I
but I would go along with it to a certain extent, for sure. And what was great about Gian is he had just had a great pointer finger. He could say, like, you do this is great. And to feel that sort of confidence just sometimes keeps you going, right? And keeps you keeps you making things, and that was what was so wonderful about him. Is he just also, which is, he was a great hype person, right? And we all need that person in our lives, and he was that person for me for a good long while. So
yeah, someone to the belief to go and do the next indicated thing, that there's a purpose, because
yeah, exactly.
sit there. I mean, and when I'm sitting there and it feels like I'm cutting myself, like it's just like, what's the fucking point sometimes,
Yeah,
and then I get to this ecstatic truth of it, and it's just like, that's it. That's fucking
yeah.
it. Let me I just wanna I don't have the Daniel Johnston book, but
Oh, that's fine.
wait. And okay, we'll list all these wonderful books, and I read them all, and if we had more time, I would just have you read. Let's see if is there a section that, do you have something?
No, this is the thing. I don't even have like copies of those books.
Yeah, you wrote to me that you were searching for the Sarah. I love this card. The system, the nervous system.
Yeah.
And you said, sadly, I don't have any copies of the Sarah book, but when I do, I'll send one your way. P.S. I actually am going to get a copy of the Sarah book and send it on next.
That's right. It's an update to the note for sure. Right. So. Well, thank you, Laura. I appreciate it.
I really, thank you so much for your time doing this, and it was really great.
Yeah, it was wonderful. Thank you.
And when, or no, I don't want to. So, how do I ask this where it's not fucked up? Where are you in your process of your next book? And nobody can ask me that question because.
Oh yeah, no, I mean, I have one kind of done, and I'm about like, I don't know, halfway through with another one. I want to try to have a draft by this fall, and I'm kind of I'm in that, that kind of point in time where I'm putting things together and I'm seeing what fits, and if I have a hole somewhere, I'm writing something to fill that hole. So, hopefully here not too much longer.
That sounds great. Well, thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, thank you, Laura. I appreciate it.